Welcome in, everybody, to Important Nonsense 32 and 32. We have two teams back to back that were absolutely terrible last season, so they had to bring in the heavy hitters. At Nonsense Steve, we got Mason, we got Mike Burland. How you guys doing today?
Good. I am just finally getting hit by the heat wave here that has struck the country. It's a balmy
That's been killing
90
me for 3 months.
It's
so
a
thank
balmy
you.
98 degrees here. So yes, summer in Colorado has finally hit at July 12th. So that's how I am, Steve. How are you doing?
So you can't go with your dress flannels?
Yeah, no dress flannels
Wow.
today. Honestly, even just wearing the black is too hot at this point. You can see I'm kind of like
out there. Wow.
I'm sweating.
Oh man.
We're going to be sweating a little bit today though, because we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about some controversial topics, that's for sure.
Exciting. Mike, how about you?
I wish I could, sympathize with you guys, but it's 75 here and partly cloudy.
All right, we're out of here. That's it. We're leaving.
With a nice breeze, by the way.
Oh, with a nice. He had to throw in the breeze part too. Unbelievable.
I'm just an honest guy, So
right. Mike has dropped 3 rankings in my favorite list. And now,
geez, that's far.
Yeah, it's pretty far here, right?
Yeah, you're still above Jason, so you'll be all right. You got like 3 or 4 spots before you hit Jason.
That's right. All right, today we're doing the Carolina Panthers. We're going to kick things off as usual at quarterback with Bryce Young going into year 2. Rookie season was one to forget, and it seems like that the rankers and drafters have also forgot about him. So that makes perfect and total sense. The Panthers have done a lot this offseason to try to fix the weapons around him. That was obviously a major issue last season, although who could have guessed that Miles Sanders getting a lot of money wouldn't work out? But I digress. Bryce Young, quarterback 27 in consensus rankings, 163 overall. ADP, he's going QB 25, so basically the same general spot, 16-10. So basically right at the end of your drafts, could have him for almost free. Really, he would only be a super flex option as a QB2 if that was something you were wanting to do. Mason, you have anything on Bryce Young that you were concerned about for his own personal fantasy value?
Well, he has tangible tools that he can go out there and make these throws that we want to see. We're going to get
into number 1 overall for a reason, right?
Right. And we're going to get into some of his weapons of choice. And this rebuild for Carolina has taken a lot of time. One of the things that I'm going to be worried about is how much they can stand up and protect him a little bit later, but he definitely does have some tools. Like you said, if you want to take a flyer on him as your QB2 in a super flex, or your QB3, I guess, technically in a super flex, or wherever you want to go with that, I'm not necessarily against a flyer on there. I would go personally a different way. One of the reasons, like I said, big is that I just see pass pro being a huge issue for them. It's not something we talk about a lot in fantasy football, I guess, because, it's something that doesn't put the points directly on the board. So it's understandable. But they have to solidify that unit up. They have a lot of questions there. They didn't do a ton to answer those holes in free agency. They added Robert Hunt, which Robert Hunt was fantastic for Miami. But we'll have to see. They had the 29th. They were 29th in pressure allowed, about 40%, 40.8%, almost a 10% sack rate, 9.5. And now they're going to be starting Austin Corbett at center. He has 0 career snaps at center. So these are questions that are going to be asking. Yeah, I know. Yeah, Steve, we'll get you in there at left guard. They have a glaring need at left guard. We'll get you in there, Steve. I think it could work out.
Get me in the trenches.
It could work out about as well as what they're about to be pitching out there. So that becomes a huge issue, especially when we talk about younger guys. It's not something that's directly, pointed to when you point to some of our data spreadsheets, but we talk about it a lot. I very much think you can ruin young quarterbacks by giving them way too much pressure right at the beginning. They start seeing ghosts. It's not great for their development. And I think that he could be heading along this route despite all the tools that he has.
Mike, anything to add on that?
Yeah, it's a good point because, these guys come from Alabama and they dominate in high school and they never even see pressure. And then they're just guys in their face the whole time. So that's definitely a good point. Not a whole lot to talk about with Bryce Young in a 1 quarterback league, which most people play in. Superflex, different story. Decent maybe as, QB2 or 3. Dynasty, a whole different story. But for one quarterback, if he does well, which again, he was the number 1 overall pick for a reason. There's tools there. He can turn it around. Like, look how bad Trevor Lawrence was in 2021. Very comparable numbers to Bryce Young. And, the next season, I think he was the top 12 quarterback in total points. So it's definitely possible. Hopefully Dave Canales coming in as the head coach. He was there as the quarterback coach for Seattle when Geno had his bounce back year, offense coordinator for Baker last year when he had his bounce back year. So hopefully he can do the same here for Bryce Young. But it's just one of those, like, I'm not going to waste a draft pick on him. Maybe he's going to be a waiver wire ad, and we'll be talking about him on the waiver wire show in week 3 or something. But I don't really expect too much, and I don't want to invest a draft pick in him. I will say there's slight potential for rushing. Like, he had, I'm looking at it, like 4 games of just around 3 points, added on the ground. So that's not nothing, right? Like 3 points is almost 75% of a touchdown if you play in 4 point per passing touchdown. So he can move a little bit. So he's had a couple games of 30, 41 yards, 40 yards. So there's that, I guess, that maybe he can bump that up just a tad bit and at least be startable during a bye week or something as a streamer.
If I'm his coordinator, I'm begging him to no longer do that. I'm absolutely praying and begging him, pleading to never do some of the things that he was doing last year. Now, to be fair, it kind of leads into some of the stuff that we were talking about before. They had a ton of interior pressure. If you go back through all of the pressures, which I'm a degenerate, and we get Carolina, and the first thing I go do is turn on Bryce Young's tape and watch how many times he gets interior pressure. And that kind of helps itself to flooding outside of the pocket and moving and getting some of those yards. Right. Hopefully that's not the issue, though, and they can make good with some of the backs that they've added, which we're going to get into a little bit here in a second. And that'll add that, rushing ability that the offense just lacked last year. I mean, generally they lacked efficiency in any aspect of offensive football, but, having an established run game would go a long way. And, we'll get to
we've talked a couple of times. I think a lot of the stuff that went wrong last season also has to do with, yes, he was scrambling some, but part of the reason he was doing that is nobody could get open and he had no options. Yes. So I think they've tried to solve that part of it at least a little bit this season. Running back, it is a crowded room. Jonathan Brooks coming in, the rookie right now, running back 34, overall 114. ADP, though, he's going at RB 26. Near the end of the 8th round. So he's the one getting all the hype, but you have incumbents like Chuba Hubbard, RB 42 in the rankings, 136 overall. He is going in the 14th round. Get him for dirt cheap. And then they still have Miles Sanders and Rashad Penny. I think at least one of them gets cut by the end of preseason. They are both going undrafted, as they should be, but they are at least names that you would know. So really, it's all about Jonathan Brooks. At this point, he's being priced above where the rankers have him, priced above where I would feel comfortable with him, especially for a rookie running back on a bad team. So are we looking at Jonathan Brooks as someone that you could value as an RB3 where he's going right now? Is that something you would want to get in on, or are you going to pass?
Yeah, go ahead, Mason.
No. You go ahead, Mike. I stepped on your toes on the last one. You get on in there.
Yeah. It's funny because there's always rookie running backs that are fantasy relevant and good for fantasy. And really, Jonathan Brooks is kind of the only one in this draft class to look at just because he's the one with the clear role. Like, it's going to be his backfield eventually. Now, when is that going to be? We do have to mention he tore his ACL in November, early November in college last year. So, obviously the Panthers didn't care too much. They traded up and took him, 40th or 45th overall or something. So really good draft capital. They believe in him. This is their guy. Not much competition from Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, Rashad Penny, in my opinion. So I guess the question is going to be, how much is he going to do in September, right? And that's significant because 4 weeks is, that's like almost a third, just under a third of our fantasy season, right? Or maybe I'm doing maybe more of a quarter of our fantasy season, but that's significant, right? The first 4 weeks is not having a guy, but his ADP is where I can live with it. Like he's kind of like, for most leagues, I think he's maybe your first bench player, or like you said, kind of your RB3. So I can live with that. I'm just worried that his ADP is going to rise when we see him. Oh, he's at training camp. He's doing well in preseason, or he got some carries. And then
So you think round 8 is people being cautious on him?
I do, actually, because
Wow.
because of the ACL. Yeah, I just think if he didn't have an ACL tear, he'd be a couple rounds higher potentially. Because I think people are just in on rookies. There's more dynasty players nowadays, and people just love rookies. So the rookie fever.
Yeah, Neil and I have been in a long time keeper league, and there's always one guy we know, like that's Mr. Rookie. Anytime a rookie wide receiver or a running back is near that ADP of his spot, it's a guarantee. It's a slam dunk.
It's the promise of the unknown. I mean,
exactly.
Who could
it's the shiny new toy. Who doesn't want a shiny new toy?
Keep him off the roulette table. That's all I have to say about that. But I mean, I echo the same sentiment. For one, personally, I'm just probably going to stay away from the backfield in general. Why? Is because one of the very crucial things that Mike said there is, when is this going to be Brooks's backfield? And while they drafted him, they put him in a position to take over this backfield. It wasn't so long ago. I get it. It was a different regime, but they were doing the same thing with Miles Sanders. They've, continued to feed Chuba Hubbard the ball at weird times. Yeah. I am just afraid that they end up playing it safe in what they know and continue to just dish out carries where maybe Jonathan Brooks isn't doing poorly, but for some reason they continue to dish out more carries than they should to the rest of the room. And that's something that's going to scare me. Now, given the draft capital that you're probably going to have to get up to get him, like you said, it could creep higher. I mean, even, as Steve, as you were saying, is some people, this might even seem inflated. It might even get more inflated as the, training camp news cycle goes. So do the draft stocks. They always rise at that time and fall and do whatever. But we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm going to stay away from the backfield in general, though. I think you could target other options. Now, obviously, that's the question that we'll have to answer, and that you're going to want to check back on all the other teams that we have to approach at that kind of time. But yeah, it seems like a hit or miss shot for me in that backfield.
One thing I do want to add is I do think they're going to want to get the ball out of Bryce Young's hands. And, if you look at just what Rachaad White was doing with Tampa Bay last year, and again, Dave Canales coming over as now the head coach of Carolina, I think maybe a lot of people are looking at that of like, oh, we could get a guy that catches 60 balls, and that he can rush for almost 1,000 yards, right? And 9 total touchdowns. So I think that's definitely part of it as well. That opportunity there. So
they're trying to go right there. And, I think it plays into what we were just talking about too, is the promise of the rookie, things like that, especially when you get a guy like Jonathan Brooks. You said it before too. This class was just not a big running backs class. Jonathan Brooks was kind of the only one that stood out a little bit above the rest. And I think if you talk to the rest of the scouting community, they probably wouldn't place Brooks within some of the top tier backs in even previous classes or even the next class. So that's something that we do have to consider. But you are right, that is why Carolina decided to take him a little bit earlier and go in, because they want that 3-down back. And the promise of having that 3-down back is huge for fantasy. I just think that we live in a different time in fantasy football than we did, even a handful of years ago, where there were more of those 3-down backs. I think we're seeing even less and less of them. Even guys that have that potential to really be 3-down backs just don't get that workload like that anymore. And that's what I'm worried about when we get into really crowded rooms like this. Personally, I mean, we'll have to check in. I was actually just looking that up a second ago, what Miles Sanders' dead contract would look like, what his dead cap hit would look like if they were to get rid of him. Let's see.
Yeah, it's still pretty high, I think.
It's still pretty high. Their potential out is probably
a 3-year deal, right?
Yeah. So this year, if they were to cut him, so they have a $2 million roster bonus, a $200,000 workout bonus. If they were to cut him, though, he would result in a almost $10.5 million cap hit. Dead cap hit, excuse me, and he's about $7.5 million cap hit this year. So they might end up having to stick with him, which is even more terrifying for this backfield. Yeah. Because if he's in that room and then they decide to give him carries for whatever reason, even though, I mean, anybody watching this show knows that we haven't been the biggest Miles Sanders truthers for a number of years, but that's a big question for the backfield as a whole.
Yeah. But, it is a new coaching staff, they can say like, hey, when you're the coaching staff and you go out and you pay this guy or the GM and stuff, and you kind of feel like I need to prove I was right. Now these guys, they can say like, hey, this wasn't our mess. So even though it is dead cap, we could cut them. Yeah. So I don't know. I understand, which makes Chuba Hubbard, in my opinion, like a late round flyer, especially if Brooks is going to be slow to start the year in September. So
it was a 4-year deal, not a 3-year deal. I was off on that. But for Miles Sanders, if they cut him, because that's what I was looking at, it was preseason. If they cut him after the preseason, they would save $200,000 this year, and there'd be 1.4 in dead cap next year. So technically, they would be paying him the same amount of money whether he stays or goes for this season if they cut him in preseason. But if he's that bad and you're not going to use him, they may just want to open the roster spot for somebody else that's earned it.
Yeah.
It's a possibility, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 4 years, $25.4 million.
Crazy.
Gross. Really gross.
Oh.
Yeah, it's real bad. So wide receiver. This is where they've done a little bit of work. They went out and made a trade for Deontay Johnson, who couldn't get on the same page with Pittsburgh. Shocking. A Pittsburgh wide receiver who gets ahead of himself and gets a real big ego. That never happens in Pittsburgh. I don't know. And then they also still have Adam Thielen coming in from last season. They draft Xavier Legette. They still have Jonathan Mingo, who was a rookie last season. Didn't do a lot in his rookie season. Nobody did, but he's still there at least. Any of these guys sticking out to you? Deontay right now is the highest of all of them. He's wide receiver 35 in the ranks, wide receiver 39 in ADP, but wide receiver 39 these days is still going in the 6th round, which is bananas. But I don't know. Do you want to take your 6th pick on Deontay Johnson at this point?
I know.
I'll be fair. Like, Deontay Johnson has a lot going for him. I think he's a scrappy dude. I think he runs pretty clean routes. And I think that if they get him in the right spot, he could be a huge asset to this team. One thing that that this offense struggled mightily with is that they were 31st in receiving first downs. It was atrocious. Deontay Johnson, though, over the last 3 seasons has 143 first down receptions and touchdowns or conversion receptions. And that is top 25. And with that being said, that's all the receivers, all qualifying receivers over the last 3 seasons. So that's quite a few names for him to go over. So it's not like he is without merit, and he can play a role for this offense. Now, is it worth that price? I would say no. I think that this room isn't going to have a dominating wide receiver one that would look to being, you're looking at Adam Thielen, who is obviously far removed from his heyday, but he's definitely commanded some targets over time. And I think that that's kind of where his game still lies. We'll have to see how that feeds into each other.
I was going to say, like, the appeal for Deontay Johnson, basically his entire career, hasn't been the flashiness God knows it's not scoring touchdowns. Set the all-time NFL record for having the most targets in a season without scoring a touchdown. So the appeal has been the domination of targets in Pittsburgh. And last year you had Adam Thielen get 137 targets and he led the team. So how, is 137 for Deontay Johnson? I don't think is going to be, feasible.
It's not feasible. No,
but
it's
not even that. Even if he were to get that, I don't think he would be a wide receiver 3. I think he'd be in a flex discussion maybe, but not a wide receiver 3. I don't think he's not going to have the yards and catches to go with it.
Yeah. It's a rich price for me, and not to mention he's not the best receiver in that room.
Right.
Xavier Leggett's the best receiver in that room. And when we talk about, while it's a disappointing ad, as I'm a big Xavier Legette fan, I didn't really love where he landed. It is what it is, but it fits a need for that offense too. They were dead last in explosive play percentage, or explosive pass percentage, excuse me, only 8.9%. Leggett was top 5 in the Power 5 with 33 explosive plays last season. He had one more than Marvin Harrison Jr. Another thing that they've just struggled with is dead last in yards after the catch. They were over 100 yards less than the next worst team, which was Vegas. They only had 1,483 passing yards or receiving yards after the catch. So they just lack explosive offensively. I think if you're going to be able to have a guy like that take the top off the defense and kind of have some possession and shorter route receivers with Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, guys to kind of cross the field, layer it out, they could be better. But it does tie into what we said earlier, or what I said earlier with, is their protection going to hold up? That's a huge question too. So,
yeah, but Deontay Johnson, where I'm at is I'm fairly confident he's going to return that wide receiver 30. I'm fairly confident he's going to be a top 30 to top 35 guy at worst, if he's healthy. So I think you're going to get what you kind of paid for him. But like you said, that round 6 is rich. I just don't see the upside at all. I really don't. I know he was kind of a target monster there, 3 straight years, over 140 targets, which is pretty insane. But how many passing touchdowns is this team going to have? That being said, he did catch 5 last year of Pittsburgh's 13. So, he had almost 40% of their touchdowns. But again, he could just be in another situation where they only throw 15 or 18 touchdowns or so. So I look at the guys going around him, even guys like JSN, Christian Watson, if he can get his hamstrings right. These guys, so much more upside in my opinion, even like Rome Odunze and some of the rookies and stuff. So that's the direction I'd steer in that round if I'm going to go receiver. And then, Legette, he's the guy I want out of everyone here just because the upside. I don't want Thielen, who's going, round 13, 14. I'll take Xavier Legette and hope that, I was kind of saying pre-draft stuff, besides the top, Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, and Odunze, Legette has the highest ceiling out of all these receivers that are going. This guy's a freak, Yep. Now, can he put it together? We'll see. But, in terms of the physical tools, he's everything you could ask for. So, yeah, he's the potential explosive one, win your league type of player, and you're getting him potentially in round 13, 12. So that's the direction I'd go.
Yeah. And so when we talk about that, return on investment on where you're taking these guys, am I more confident that I'm going to get a top 40 receiver in Deontay Johnson? Sure. But am I more confident than that Xavier Legette's going to be well over wide receiver 66? I would put it on that. Even if they're only throwing, 15 touchdowns this season, he is, in my opinion, the more dominating receiver out of that entire room. So, and it's hard to say because they're, rookies and, it's kind of the unknown thing, but just in pure skill set, if I were a defensive coordinator and I'm playing Carolina this year, I'm keying more on whatever Legette's going to be doing versus maybe the rest of the room.
And my whole thing with this is, again, Deontay Johnson, we already know needs the volume. I don't know if the volume is going to be there. And we're talking about in the same area of ADP as of right now. Theoretically speaking, you're talking about your 3rd wide receiver, depending on how you build your team. Could even be your 4th. I don't know. Me personally, how I'm roster building is those first 2 guys that I'm taking off the board that I'm starting week in and week out are guys I know have a safe floor and have high ceiling potential that I can rely on and count on. Everybody after that is going to be bye week fill-ins and is going to be guys that I hope I can hit the lottery on. And the guys going around Deontay Johnson right now are Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley in Tennessee, Rashee Rice because of his off-field stuff we don't know about, Xavier Worthy in KC as well, Rome Odunze, Jordan Addison, Ladd McConkey. I mean, there are so many players in that same region that I feel like have a much higher ceiling and have a very similar floor. So I'm just not comfortable spending that kind of draft capital on Deontay Johnson for whatever the return on investment is. But I will take a shot on the rookie, and I agree that late in the draft, there's no reason to be taking Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen is a guy you can absolutely pick up 2 weeks before you need him for your bye week fill-in. You don't need him wasting a roster space the entire season.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right, we're going to finish it up with tight ends here. Jatavian Sanders, the rookie, ranking tight end 30. Tommy Tremble, the incumbent, tight end 59. Both guys going completely undrafted, as they absolutely should be. If we're worried about wide receivers getting enough targets and getting involved enough in the offense, we absolutely should be worried about the tight ends doing that. The biggest thing here, these are guys in the dart throw territory of, can they score a touchdown? You score a touchdown, you get a 7. They don't, you get a 1. That's basically what you're looking at for either of these guys. But do you see any kind of upside in Sanders? Obviously not draft worthy, but is it a name you even want to keep on your radar as we go into the season?
Yeah,
What's your feelings on Sanders, Mike? Because I have some very strong ones.
I kind of liked him coming out of college, like as a receiving tight end. So
I'll be honest, I think he lacks ball skills. I think that he is a huge body, and on paper, you're like, man, 6'4", 250. Look at how he moves. It doesn't matter because he has horrendous ball skills. And every time you go and cut on his tape in the red zone, I left scratching my head.
Mm-hmm.
So while I wanted to be, when I first started breaking into the pre-draft process, and I was like, this guy might be a gem at tight end. Look at his size.
Mm-hmm.
It never panned out on film. Now there's a lot of questions of he honestly also got some really wickedly inaccurate balls too at times, which was a little bit odd for given who they have under center there at Texas. But, they didn't really try to target him in the red zone that often. He only had 9 targets in the red zone. I think that shows that their offensive, coaching staff knew what they had in him, knew he doesn't have the ball skills to really go out and make those plays contested when the field gets shortened. So if he were to make good on his size, I could see him as a stash. And I actually even wrote it right here. Sanders matchup problem / worth the stash ? And it was so I could answer my own question. And that was no. That was no. You're better off. I understand that the entire tight end landscape is just abysmal, and a stash is a stash, whatever. You're better off stashing somewhere else, because I just don't think the skill set is there to, accommodate you don't have to draft him, so it doesn't really matter, but still I think your roster spot is more valuable than,
it's more of a dynasty discussion, and even in dynasty, I'm not super interested. To me, when we were doing the breakdowns and the rookie profiles like this, he profiled more like you're saying, not having the red zone targets, not really having the ball skills, and especially where he landed in Carolina with that messy running back room that they have and the protection problems that they've had for Bryce Young. This felt a lot more like a blocking tight end pick for them than an actual guy they want to get involved in the offense.
Yeah, I definitely for year one, I'm not expecting anything, and I don't expect we're going to be talking about him.
Real dicey anyway.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit slightly more excited about him. Again, I see the note of not a lot of production. I thought he had decent production in terms of raw numbers, just considering, Xavier Worthy was there, A.D. Mitchell, even Jordan Whittington, who was drafted. He had a first-round pick, a second-round pick there. Like you said, kind of some inaccurate passes coming his way. But again, we're talking about for redraft 2024.
Right. Correct.
I don't really expect to be talking about Jatavian Sanders or any Panthers tight end.
Jatavian Sanders, I feel like, is a name that if you want to know it for Dynasty, he is somebody that I may be looking at and evaluating as a buy low after a terrible rookie season next spring.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that you can get for basically dirt cheap, or maybe even pick up off waivers going into next year's draft. That's where I think we're going to be at with Jatavian Sanders. So not anybody you need to know for this year. All right, that's it.
And
We
that's
got through
only
Carolina.
because of how absolutely atrocious the position is.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
abolish
Well, I
the
mean,
tight
and at
end.
some point, he's tight end 30 right now, right? But at some point, you're going to have the old guard start to fade away. So at some point, he's going to have to shift up by default. But there's always going to be new young guys coming in. All right, we got through Carolina. It wasn't as painful because we tried to rush through it as quickly as possible. But we appreciate you guys being here with us. We will, of course, be back tomorrow with another one. 32 and 32 continues with the Bears. So we'll catch up with that one. Till next time, keep up the nonsense.
I'm Tim Kitzer from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, and you can find all the guys at ImportantNonsense.com. Kaboom!